Hi, I'm Chris Lackey,
And I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
and we want to tell you about a new feature that's on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast website.
That's right, it's a donate button there at hppodcraft.com. And we want to be clear, the show is free.
Free, always will be free.
Always will be free, and you don't owe us anything.
Not a thing.
However, there are some costs associated with us producing the show. So if you could donate any amount, if you donate $20 or more before the end of the year, we will send you a soundtrack CD featuring many of the pieces of music that we've used in the podcast so far.
Mostly by Chad Pfeiffer. All original content.
So if you could just log onto our site at hppodcraft.com, hit that donate button. You can donate via PayPal. We'll accept that money from you, and if it's $20 or more, we'll send you the CD.
So please donate.
Thanks, folks, and welcome to the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
hppodcraft.com. When the last days were upon me, and the ugly trifles of existence began to drive me to madness, like the small drops of water that torturers let fall ceaselessly upon one spot of their victim's body, I loved the irradiate refuge of sleep. In my dreams I found a little of the beauty that I had vainly sought in life, and wandered through old gardens and enchanted woods.
That was an excerpt from Ex Oblivione,
Ex Oblivione.
which is Latin for from oblivion or out of oblivion.
Yeah, there you go. And our reader today is none other than the illustrious Andrew Lehman.
That's right. And we're doing, another double feature, although it's less of a double feature today, more of a short and then a feature.
In the feature, yes.
Our short being Ex Oblivione,
Yes.
and our feature being
The Nameless City.
The Nameless City.
Ex Oblivione is really, I guess it's a prose poem.
That's what they call it.
That's what they call it. It's really just a very short story.
Yeah, that's what I call it.
Yeah.
And it's written by a guy who's clearly near death, and he's tired of life's mundanity, and he finds refuge in sleep.
This is very similar to Cellophane.
Yeah, it is.
You know, this is a guy who doesn't like life, and he wants to go to the land of dreams where things are better and he feels happier. And...
Now, as opposed to Cellophane, he actually spends very little time talking about all the dreamlands that he voyages to.
Yeah.
He says, I prefer the refuge of sleep, and once I went to this place, which he dispatches in a sentence, and once I went to this other place, and then...
went to a golden valley.
And then he says,
And once I walked through a golden valley that led to shadowy groves and ruins, and ended in a mighty wall green with antique vines, and pierced by a little gate of bronze.
It's a large gate, it's golden, and it has vines and plants that are kind of wrapped around the edges of it.
Yeah, and he tries to find the latch on it.
Yeah, but he can't.
He can't do it. During his wanderings, though, he arrives at this dream city, which he calls Zakarian.
Yes.
And there he finds a papyrus that contains the thoughts of dream sages and tells of this gate.
So he kind of does some research.
That's right, he
He's a little
does.
Scholarly, yeah.
Some of the dream sages wrote gorgeously of the wonders beyond the irrepassable gate, but others told of horror and disappointment. I knew not which to believe, yet longed more and more to cross forever into the unknown land. For doubt and secrecy are the lure of lures, and no new horror can be more terrible than the daily torture of the commonplace. So when I learned of the drug which would unlock the gate and drive me through, I resolved to take it when next I awaked.
Barely, this is like the anarchist cookbook of the dreamlands. It tells you how to make awesome drugs. So he takes this drug when he wakes up.
Yes.
Puts him back down, and when he gets back to the shadowy groves, the gate is open.
Open, yeah.
And there's this glow and music as he steps
Like
through.
kind of a white glow, I think is what it says.
Yeah.
But as the gate swung wider and the sorcery of drug and dream pushed me through, I knew that all sights and glories were at an end. For in that new realm was neither land nor sea, but only the white void of unpeopled and illimitable space. So, happier than I had ever dared hope to be, I dissolved again into that native infinity of crystal oblivion from which the demon life had called me for one brief and desolate hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
This story to me, and that's the end of the story.
That's the end.
It's
It's very short.
story. This story to me was about two things.
Mm-hmm.
It was about depression.
Yeah.
And maybe a comforting bit about oblivion.
Yeah.
When you're really low and all you want to do is sleep. The little mundane things like, I have to do dishes. It just seems overwhelming. You know, you can't get out of bed to do it.
Yeah.
This really nailed that feeling to me.
Yeah, it really did. And I think, obviously, Lovecraft has some
Yeah.
personal issues and probably some heavy sadness that he's dealing with. And then there's a quote from In Defense of Daggett that I think really sums this up. He says, there's nothing better than oblivion, since in oblivion there's no wish unfulfilled.
I actually That may sound strange, but that makes me. I like that.
I do too.
There's comfort in that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
There's no more struggling or fighting.
There's no more fear. There's no more pain. There's no more wanting,
and therefore there's no more desiring, and therefore there's no feeling that you can't have things. Therefore there's no feelings of despair, right?
On the other end of that, there's no happiness. There's no
Right.
joy. But you can't have happiness or joy without having sadness and pain.
Right.
I mean, we're getting very philosophical now.
Well, which, that's
I mean,
that's
yeah.
what you get when you read something that's influenced by Schopenhauer. who for me is actually, I'm a huge fan of that man's work as well.
I'm a Schopenhauer guy myself.
Yeah.
I thought that Oblivione is really well written, and it really communicates an idea.
I think it's really well written as well, and in fact, regardless of whether they were a genre fan or not, I might even give this story to somebody who is dealing with some depression issues, because it's so nice to be understood.
Yeah.
You know?
Great. Oh, well, anyway, this story, too, was written in either 1920 or 21, so we're getting into 1921 here.
Okay.
And it was published in the United Amateur in 21, but he posted it.
Yeah.
He wrote it under a pseudonym,
Oh, right.
Ward Phillips.
Ward Phillips.
So for some reason, Lovecraft wanted to sort of distance himself
Yeah.
from this. But moving on to our
Feature today is The Nameless City.
When I drew nigh the nameless city, I knew it was accursed. I was traveling in a parched and terrible valley under the moon, and afar I saw it protruding uncannily above the sands, as parts of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave.
Ugh. It reminds me of my dad, my pops, when I was a kid, used to tell me that some of the poorer cemeteries around where he grew up, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he said that the graves were so shallowly dug that when he was a kid, they'd walk by and they'd see hair growing up out of the ground.
Right.
I don't know if that was true or not, man.
I've heard you tell that story before, yeah.
Yeah, because it scared me.
It's really scary.
That image, I just imagined this. Oh.
I think hair's pretty biodegradable, so I think that story is not very likely.
Yeah,
to
I
be
think
true.
it was
Yeah.
specifically told to torture me in my youth.
And that would seem to work because you're still telling that story.
I'm still telling it, and folks, if you have kids, torture them with scary stories because it breeds imagination, in my opinion.
Oh,
Get them
yeah.
reading this H.P. Lovecraft young.
Oh, right, yeah.
So they grow up crazy and thoughtful and imaginative, and hopefully in their dreams travel to nameless cities such as this. But this isn't a dreamland story.
No,
this
this
is
is
actually real. To a lot of people, they say this is really the first story in the Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah, I've read that this is kind of stepping into it. There's a big phrase that's early on in this story.
Yeah. Okay, so there's the city. It's nameless, but it's also apparently secret, right?
Yes.
It is told of in whispers around campfires, and muttered about by grandams in the tents of sheikhs, so that all the tribe shun it without wholly knowing why. It was of this place that Abdul al-Hazred, the mad poet, dreamed on the night before he sang his unexplainable couplet. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die.
Oh, yes. Boom. I didn't know that this was from The Nameless City.
Yeah.
The first time I ever read this was in Cthulhu.
It's one of his most famous quotes, and everybody associates it with Call of Cthulhu. So
Yeah.
I didn't know it was here either. I've never read this story before. This was my first
And
time
neither
going
did
through
I,
it.
yeah.
It's such a cool little couplet, too, really, I reckon it means, for certain creatures, death is meaningless.
Right.
They can lay idle so long that they can outlast the lifespan of death itself.
Right.
But metaphorically, I mean, concepts such as hatred or corruption or maybe even love or beauty are so eternal that they can outweigh death as well. I mean, there's a lot going on in just that couple of sentences.
Right. And also, this is the Mad Arab pops up. This is the first time we ever get to see him.
Abdul al-Hazred, he wrote the Necronomicon, although they don't mention the title of that book here.
No, they don't.
And he was, ripped apart by strange forces in the middle of a
Yeah, it's
bazaar
like
or
supposedly
something.
invisible demons ripped him up in the middle of broad daylight, in the middle of a bazaar.
Wow.
Really cool.
This couplet sometimes reminds me of actually Bram Stoker's Dracula. When
Oh, really?
In that one moment in the book when Dracula says to them, "My revenge has just begun. I spread it over centuries, and time is on my side." Always reminded me of that because I love that the supernatural force sees time differently.
Oh, right, sure.
So
yeah.
for humans, it's very finite.
Yeah.
But for the creature, it says, I can outweigh you,
Yeah.
and I can kill your grandchildren.
Yeah.
You know? And it's horrific. What can you do against somebody who's eternal? Well, and just like the protagonist of Dracula, our protagonist in the Nameless City, he ignores the warnings of the townspeople.
He wants to find this nameless city.
Yeah, he
wants
wants
to know
to
where
find
it is.
In this case, it's the Arabs who say, "Don't go,
Yeah.
don't try and find
But
it."
he hops on his camel and he
Yeah.
heads off in the desert. desert by himself.
Goes out in the wastelands, and he finds it at night, but its ghastly stillness kind of makes him forget that he should be happy about finding it.
Right.
And he decides to wait for the dawn.
Well, there's a series of storms, too.
And so when he finds it, he waits outside of it with his camel, and when dawn breaks, he goes into the city finally, which he describes as older than any other city in the world.
Beyond any civilization that has existed.
Older than Egypt.
Yes.
And he can't find anything immediately suggest that men lived here. But he does say,
There were certain proportions and dimensions in the ruins which I did not like.
I always love it when Lovecraft plays with the shape of things. And all these stories where the stairs are too steep or the dimensions are non-Euclidean geometrically, And
well, it's a subtle kind of hint of what's to come, and of course things are older. So I've been in like older temples and things like that before, and they are small. They just seem weird. If the pyramids, if I've never personally been in there, but I've seen my friends' pictures of them in the pyramids. They're tiny, tiny little. I think if you're a big person, you can't actually fit through it
because the people were smaller.
The people were smaller, and I think those specifically with the pyramid, those were kind of supposed to be secret passages. They were hiding.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they were hiding from grave robbers.
Oh, how cool!
But like the temples and just the corridors and ways are all very small.
So you're saying that if knowing that about the pyramids, you probably would assume that the passages are small because of what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Grave robbing, not because the creatures were small.
No. At this point, me being a person who knows a little bit about ancient things, I would think, oh yeah, of course it's a little small.
Yeah,
and
something about it I don't like, but
right.
So on this first expedition, that's really his only observation. He doesn't find anything, and he gets out of the city before night falls. But the next day, he goes back in. And he's looking around, and he imagines how mighty this city may have once been. And in this, he also thinks of Sarnath.
Yes.
And he mentions it in the story. This could be like that ancient city of doomed Sarnath. He'll take references to real history and real literature, and he mixes it in with his own mythology and his own history. And it lends this air of reality. And you don't really know what's what.
And that's part of what Lovecraft, really strove to do, and he talked about it in his letters. Like, he wanted a realism. He wanted to create a sense of realism. So he would, mix in his stuff with real things, and then he would mix his new stuff in with stuff that he already written.
Yeah.
So the typical reader, would read these things and not necessarily know, unless you're a learned scholar about ancient Greece or Egypt or whatever, you don't necessarily know which ones are true.
And you're like, okay, so is Memnon made up or is Sarnath made up?
Right.
One of these is real. So on this second expedition, he finds a low cliff, and on the face of it are these small houses. He goes into these. He's excited. He finally found something he can enter, and in them he finds these primitive altars and pillars. Everything is really low to the ground.
Yeah, he's going to get on his knees and still crouch down.
Yeah.
Like, he can't be on his knees and be up straight.
Something just seems off about the whole thing.
I shuddered oddly in some of the far corners, for certain altars and stones suggested forgotten rites of terrible, revolting, and inexplicable nature, and made me wonder what manner of men could have made and frequented such a temple.
So night comes, but he says his discoveries so far have made him more curious than afraid. So this time he's not going to leave.
Yeah.
He keeps working. And he's in those little houses or temples, and then he hears the wind pick up outside, and he hears his camel getting upset. His camel's like, I don't like it out here. I'm a little freaked out.
Well, there's a lot of winds and the sandstorms, and it's pretty treacherous. Nothing, again, supernatural yet at this point,
No.
I feel. It's
he
very
comes outside
mundane.
to see what's going on, and there is this great wind kicking up sand. But it's not everywhere, and he traces the path of the wind all the way to this temple.
It poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it ruffled the sand and spread about the weird ruins. Soon it grew fainter, and the sand grew more and more still, till finally all was at rest again. But a presence seemed stalking among the spectral stones of the city, and when I glanced at the moon, it seemed to quiver as though mirrored in unquiet waters.
I thought that was such a beautiful description of the moon.
Yeah.
We get a lot of moon action in H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Well, the moon, it's
he describes
the moon.
it a lot. Yeah.
The moon is like the symbol of night. It's powerful,
Yeah.
And like most of the time, people aren't nocturnal. So you know what I mean? The
There's
moon
an
is a
eeriness to
symbol
it.
of the unknown and darkness, and it's the one thing, it's great.
Yeah,
And of course,
I
it would be
love
so long.
that it looks almost like its own reflection. So our protagonist waits for the wind to die down and enters this temple. At first, he thinks it's a naturally occurring structure, because obviously the wind's been pouring through it, so that would maybe have been helping to erode
And
and
it's
carve it out.
huge. It's gigantic.
It's taller than the other structures. But the altars and whatnot that he finds in there are still squat and short.
low to the ground.
He finds that there are some carvings and painted records here. I imagine this is a little more like an Egyptian find in that the paintings are a little dusty and hard to make out. And
right,
chalky.
On the walls and things, yeah.
Before he can really dig in, he notices with some fear, I hear it says he grows faint. There's an artificial door chiseled into the rock, and that's where the wind is coming from in this temple. So he goes to that door, and he enters it and sees these steps descending down steeply. They're really tiny.
Yeah, very small steps with a low ceiling.
Again, his curiosity overwhelms his fear, and he decides to descend these steps. He describes it as like he's climbing cautiously down as if he's on a rope ladder.
Right,
like
yeah.
It is only in the terrible phantasms of drugs or delirium that any other man can have had such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths toward which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must be traversing. There were changes of direction and of steepness, and once I came to a long, low-level passage where I had to wriggle feet first along the rocky floor, holding my torch at arm's length beyond my head.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah.
If I don't care what's down there, I am not wriggling along the ground. Oh.
I personally, I understand that the excitement of this for this guy. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't honestly be afraid.
You wouldn't?
No, because I mean, like an old place in the middle of the desert, there's not going to be anything in there.
Well, you're thinking as an archaeologist.
I'm thinking as an archaeologist. There's not going to be any animals. There's not going to be, there's nothing in there. So nothing could hurt you. It's just...
I'm just claustrophobic.
Yeah, I think you might be a little claustrophobic. I would be very excited, and I empathize with the protagonist in this. That I think I can see why he would be wanting to push on. I mean, he found this ancient pre-human, or maybe pre-human. I don't know.
Chris, if we ever take this expedition, I'll stand outside with the phone wire, and you go down there.
All right, no problem. No problem.
One thing I loved about that last passage is, when you use a simile often, when writers use similes, they do it because they want to be relatable. They'll say. You use like or as to connect to a feeling, something that people can relate to. You'll say, her flesh was cold as ice. Everybody knows what ice feels like.
Sure, of course.
I felt guilty as a scolded child. I like that he says that the passage goes down like some hideous haunted well. As if the reader's going to go, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, everybody's got a haunted well, but the one we had was hideous.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Oh, it was so ugly. I know exactly what that's like. But, he's Lovecraft. It works somehow.
It works. He's getting a little nervous, and he's starting to think about, at this point, the Mad Arab again.
Yeah. His torch goes out as he's continuing down this passage.
Oh, yes.
What I did want to mention, the one thing that horrifies me about this, Chris, is he says it takes him hours to go down there.
Right.
That bothers me, too. I mean, that means you're pretty deep in the earth.
Yeah, but, that's exciting.
Okay. When his torch goes out, he starts thinking through passages from literature. And again, he mixes fictional authors like Alhazred the Mad Arab, as you mentioned, but with real writers.
With Dunsany.
Yeah, Dunsany and Thomas More, whom he quotes in a little passage. And anyway, he arrives at a level ground finally. And he's blown away to find himself in this passage that's lined by wooden and glass cases.
Yeah, but he only knows this by touching and feeling.
Right, he's blind, basically. So he flounders ahead in a sort of creeping run. He's so used to thinking visually that he almost imagines he can see this chamber. But he can't.
But, this... And then, now, Chad, this is the point that I would say.
Yeah.
I would go back up. Just because, I mean, it's dark. What's the point? You're not going to discover anything in the darkness. You need some flippin' light.
And then, in a moment of indescribable emotion, I did see it. There came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew that I saw the dim outlines of the corridor and the cases, revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural painting whose lines and colors were beyond description. The cases were of a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and contained the mummified forms of creatures outreaching in grotesqueness the most chaotic dreams of man. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting sometimes the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or the paleontologist ever heard. In size, they approximated a small man, and their forelegs bore delicate and evidently flexible feet, curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. To nothing can such things be well compared. In one flash, I thought of comparisons as varied as the cat, the bulldog, the mythic satyr, and the human being.
I love it when he jumbles up all sorts of incongruous creatures, you know.
It gets your imagination going, but it makes it very indistinct, so it makes it creepy.
It suggests a lot without describing anything.
Right. And I think that's one of the cool things. It's like in a horror film, how once you see the creature, it's not scary anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes quantifiable. You can say, oh, it's like a gorilla with horns, or it's like, you know, it's like a horse with a dragon's head. You know, once you can see it, you can make a judgment on it. But if you don't know what it is, if you can't quite put your finger on it, you can't make that judgment call, which is scary. You don't know what you're dealing with.
Also, it's great that even if you, in his fiction, even when you do see it, it's so mad that you can't correlate everything all at once. You're looking at it, you're going half cat, half bat, half rhinoceros, part George Hamilton.
One of his stories, he does use half 3 times, right?
I think so.
Well, it doesn't quite make sense.
Well, he assumes that these creatures are some sort of totem beast. You know, they're not real.
Yeah.
And looking at the murals, he begins to chart what he assumes happened to the men who lived here, assuming the men are represented by the paintings of these crocodile-ish creatures. And what the story tells him is that way before Africa rose out of the ocean, when the world was a much different place geologically, this was actually like a seaside community. This was a oceanside town.
Like Santa Barbara.
Yeah, exactly. This was Santa Barbara. The waters unfortunately shrank away over time, and it became desert. And because of this, they probably perceived it as their own global warming or whatever. The civilization struggled to stay intact, and eventually their prophets said, we have to dig deep down into the earth and get away from the surface. It's the only way our race is going to survive. One thing he finds strange as he studies their paintings, he notices that there are no real references to natural death. People die in wars and as a result of calamity, but no natural death, which is strange.
Also strange that he's gleaning all of this information from some pictures.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
Like, how is that communicated?
I don't know.
In a picture that people aren't dying of natural death.
Well, I think it's because he might think, well, in hieroglyphs usually there'll be some kind of funereal rites. That's a staple of Egyptian myth, and the mere absence of it is what he said. But I don't know. You're right.
But he talks about that there is unnatural death, so there would be funerary rites.
Yeah,
so what is there in the frescoes that I just thought it was funny?
It is funny. Well, so he continues to study the paintings, and he sees that as the reptile creatures had to abandon their city, they grew more hostile toward the upper realms. And there's even a painting now. Finally, a man does show up in one of these things, and there's a painting of them ripping this man. Possibly he's some explorer or something like that, just ripping him to pieces.
Apart. Yes. Grisly.
And so he goes along this passage. He gets to the end of the passage and finds yet another open gate, which leads to this infinite sort of effulgent mist,
which is luminescent.
It's kind of like the gate in Ex Oblivione.
Yeah, none like the gate.
He likes this image of the gate with the smoke machine behind it.
And the floodlights.
Yeah, the floodlights. There's a steep flight of steps within that gate, but he really can't see too far down them. And here he pauses and he thinks back to those strange low ceilings of the rooms he's explored, and he thinks, maybe the people even imitated these crawling creatures they idolized.
Right.
Which actually is a pretty creepy image.
That is pretty creepy.
So they put themselves on the ground and kind of wriggled around because they wanted to be more like these.
I don't know if that's a very scientific conclusion that he comes to.
No, but and at this point it seems pretty obvious.
Yeah.
That these creatures actually lived here, but I try to think, he's got a scientific mind, and as a scientist, he's simply pursuing the most likely interpretation first. It is more likely that human beings acted that way.
That there would be some other kind of crocodile people.
And I think that he's spending this time contemplating because he's scared, and he's trying to get up the nerve to go down through this next gate. And then while he's contemplating, he hears something.
It was a deep, low moaning, as of a distant throng of condemned spirits, and came from the direction in which I was staring. Its volume rapidly grew, till soon it reverberated frightfully through the low passage, and at the same time I became conscious of an increasing draft of cold air, likewise flowing from the tunnels and the city above.
And at first, that actually makes him feel better. He says a natural phenomenon tends to dispel broodings over the unknown.
Right.
But
more and more madly poured the shrieking, moaning night wind into that gulf of the inner earth. I dropped prone again and clutched vainly at the floor for fear of being swept bodily through the open gate into the phosphorescent abyss. Such fury I had not expected, and as I grew aware of an actual slipping of my form toward the abyss, I was beset by 1,000 new terrors of apprehension and imagination.
Yeah, so this wind is kind of pushing him, blowing him into this glowing mist that's at the bottom of this, miles deep hole.
And I can't help it. It reminds me of Evil Dead 2, when Ash is getting pulled towards... It just did immediately. I can't help it. I imagine, all the kitchen sink flying past him in the car.
How do I stop this thing?
And he screams, but it's lost in, as he says, the hellborn babble of the howling wind wraiths. And then he begins babbling that couplet over and over.
That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die.
The wind is trying to pull him down into the abyss. And he says, at that point in the story, only the desert gods know what really took place. He doesn't know how he survived this, but the details he does remember are pretty funny.
I have said that the fury of the rushing blast was infernal, cacodemoniacal, and that its voices were hideous with the pent-up viciousness of desolate eternities. Presently, those voices, while still chaotic before me, seemed to my beating brain to take articulate form behind me. And down there in the grave of unnumbered eon-dead antiquities, leagues below the dawn-lit world of men, I heard the ghastly cursing and snarling of strange-tongued fiends. Turning, I saw outlined against the luminous ether of the abyss what could not be seen against the dusk of the corridor. A nightmare horde of rushing devils, hate-distorted, grotesquely panoplied, half-transparent, devils of a race no man might mistake, the crawling reptiles of the Nameless city. And as the wind died away, I was plunged into the ghoul-peopled blackness of Earth's bowels. For behind the last of the creatures, the great brazen door clanged shut with a deafening peal of metallic music, whose reverberations swelled out to the distant world to hail the rising sun as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile.
So basically, these little crocodile guys are still down there doing their thing.
What happens exactly in that paragraph, though? So he passes through the gate?
No.
Or it clangs shut before he can get sucked through?
Yeah. I think that the winds are blowing and he could see them inside there, kind of snarling and biting, scrambling for him, and then the wind. I'm guessing that the gust of winds that maybe if they opened in towards or out towards him, that the wind blew them closed, once those closed, he was able to the wind stopped and he was able to get out of there.
Lovecraft tactfully leaves out the part where he scrambles back up the stairs, peeing his pants the whole time in an unnameable amount of pants peeing. And that's the end of the story.
That is the end of the story.
And when was this story published?
It was written in January of 1921, but wasn't published until November in the Wolverine. Some people say that he based this kind of off of you guessed it, Dunsany tale, The Probable Adventure of Three Literary Men.
What do you think?
I think it's... I kind of like it. I think it's cool, but it does go on quite a bit, and it doesn't really explore any new ideas. It's basically there could have been a civilization before humanity and a species before humanity, which is going to play later on into Lovecraft's works. Like there's a lot about protagonists discovering whole races of people,
like Rats in the Walls,
Rats in the Walls, Mountains of Madness, Shadows Out of Time.
Yeah, and even this, has shades of Juan Romero in it as well. The descent into the abyss, and then there's some kind of ritualistic stuff happening.
Oh, right, yeah. Mm-hmm. This is funny because I just listened to James Holloway's lecture that he did at Treadwell's, which is on yogsawcloth.com. And he talks about this specifically. A lot of this horror of Lovecraft's is our identity is so much based on who we are and our cultures and our culture's history. And these discoveries of things before us, it changes who we are. And I think we've talked about this a little bit. We're doing our Arthur German. And that's like a horrific thing. I mean, Lovecraft takes a lot of pride in his New England heritage.
Right.
And to somehow undermine what it means to be a New Englander what it means to be human. It's like we're the best race that's ever existed on the planet, but check this out. There was something here that existed before us, and guess what? Still exists now. We kind of see that in his dream world stuff, where these ancient civilizations like Ib and Sarnath and those places, they exist, which we'll find out later, in the dream realms.
Yeah.
And they're still thriving communities. So somehow they exist in the ancient past, and then they somehow make an impression on the collective unconsciousness of humanity. So when our dreams, these places are still actual real places.
Time itself is a foldable dimension. All time is actually happening simultaneously in a respect, and it just depends on your access point. So what's happening 1,000 years ago is also happening now. If you can enter it through the dream worlds, you can be there 1,000 years ago and also be here now. It's sort of like Polaris was like that.
Right. It's this is freaking cool stuff, man.
Yeah. One thing about this too that on a personal level reminded me of the first time you hear a statistic, and I don't know what they are. Every 5 minutes somebody is murdered in the United States, or every 2 minutes somebody's raped or whatever.
Yeah.
The minute that got into my head, I would be at the movies or eating as a kid, and I would suddenly think, how can I be enjoying this? There's somebody suffering somewhere.
Oh, right.
There's terrible things going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
And I can't do anything about them. How can I enjoy this, my Der Wiener Schnitzel when somebody's being murdered in Delaware? I don't know. But it's the same. I don't know. I feel like sometimes Lovecraft's reaching there. How can we enjoy life when right under the surface it's seething with monsters?
Right. I think he really feels that way on a level. Like we exist on this little planet in this really big universe. And I was just listening to some astronomers talking about the age of the universe and how we can see the most distant galaxy is, I think they said something like 24 billion light years or 2 billion light years, which means it took that light 2 billion light years to get from where it is to us now.
Right.
So the location of it is not there anymore. It's moved, an incredible distance. So they're trying to calculate from where it was and then figure out the math to figure out the actual size of our universe. And to even try and think about how big, like the distance from even the Earth to the moon is really far.
Yeah.
Like you would have to, I think you have to drive around the Earth 20 or 30 times, like, if to travel that distance.
To the moon.
To the moon. Because the moon's actually pretty flippin' far away.
It's 233,000 miles away.
Yeah, if you look at that's far.
Yeah.
If you look at a scale picture of the moon and a scale picture of the Earth, and then you see the distance of how actually far away, it's pretty far.
Yeah.
Because it looks pretty close, when you look up at the sky.
It's just like when I'm in Las Vegas and I think, oh, I'll just walk down from one end of this casino to the other. And I go, wait a minute, this is huge. This isn't just a regular hotel.
It's just like that.
We discussed a blog before called H.P. Lovecraft and His Legacy. I did have some time to dig into that more. It's pretty good. But when I was looking at this story, I found another blog called The Nameless City. Described as a blog of Lovecraftian horror. And there was some interesting stuff on there, too. So I'll put the...
put that in the show notes.
I'll put the link in the show notes if anybody wants to investigate the Nameless City themselves.
Well, I love investigating nameless cities.
So next week
we're doing another double feature, but this will be the last double feature for a while. I know we're trying to get through some of these earlier stories. They're very short, but we're getting closer to some of Lovecraft's bigger.
Yeah, man, we got The
works.
Outsider coming up soon and Reanimator coming up soon. But these are two, actually, I like both of these stories.
The Quest of Irannon and The Moon Bog.
The Moon Bog. There'll be more good moon stuff.
There's more moon. There's going to be some more moon. I want to thank Andrew Lehman again for rocking the reading. And with that, I am Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this is the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
HPPodcraft.com.
HPPodcraft.com.